I surprised my husband at work with a cake and found him on his knees proposing to his boss. I pretended not to know, and when he realized what I did, it was already too late. I still remember that day with perfect clarity, every tiny detail etched into my memory like acid on metal. It was our 5th wedding anniversary, a milestone I had been looking forward to celebrating for months. I had spent the entire morning in our kitchen, meticulously baking his favorite cake, red velvet with cream cheese frosting, the same flavor we had chosen for our wedding day half a decade earlier. The kitchen counters were dusted with flour, and the sweet aroma of vanilla and cocoa powder filled our small suburban home. I had taken the day off work, making up an excuse about a dentist appointment that would take the whole morning. My husband had left for work that morning with his usual quick kiss on my forehead, his mind seemingly elsewhere as he told me he'd be home around 7 in the evening and that he had something special planned for our anniversary dinner. Little did I know that I would be the one with the real surprise that day, one that would shatter the foundation of everything I thought we had built together. The plan was simple and, I thought, romantic. I would show up at his office around noon with the cake, surprise him with the treat he loved so much, and maybe we could steal away for a quick lunch together before he returned to his busy workday. I spent extra time getting ready that morning, wanting to look my best for him. I was wearing the dress he always complimented me on, a modest, knee-length blue one that he said brought out the color of my eyes. I had curled my hair the way he liked it, applied makeup carefully, and even wore the perfume he had given me for Christmas. For the first time in months, I felt truly good about myself, confident and excited about our future together. My husband worked at a prestigious marketing firm downtown, where he had been climbing the corporate ladder for the past 3 years. He'd often come home talking about his colleagues, the projects he was working on, and especially his boss, who he described with words like brilliant, innovative, and inspiring. He would light up when he mentioned her name, something I had attributed to professional admiration. Looking back now, I should have seen the signs that were right in front of me. The increasing frequency of late nights at the office, the weekend work emergencies that mysteriously required his presence, the way his eyes literally sparkled whenever he mentioned her name, the slight distance that had been growing between us, so subtle I had blamed it on work stress, or the natural evolution of a long-term relationship. When I arrived at his office building, an impressive glass and steel structure in the heart of the financial district, I felt a flutter of excitement and anticipation in my stomach. I checked my appearance one last time in the reflection of the glass doors before entering the lobby. The security guard asked me to sign in at reception, where I told the young woman behind the desk that I was there to surprise my husband for our anniversary. She smiled warmly and directed me to the 14th floor. I balanced the cake box carefully as I rode the elevator up, rehearsing in my head how I'd surprise him. Maybe I'd have someone call him out to the common area, or maybe I'd just walk straight into his office with the cake held high. I hadn't quite decided yet, wanting to go with the flow and see what felt right in the moment. The elevator doors opened to reveal a sleek, modern office space with an open floor plan. Glass walls separated different departments, and I could see people working diligently at their desks, some speaking on phones, others typing away at computers or gathered in small groups around whiteboards. I recognized a few faces from company parties and events I'd attended with my husband over the years. One of his colleagues, a woman with curly red hair who I remembered meeting at the holiday party last December, spotted me and waved, her expression shifting from friendly recognition to something that looked oddly like discomfort or confusion. "He's in the boss's office," she said, pointing down a hallway to my right. "Been in there for about half an hour." There was something in her tone that should have warned me, a certain hesitation or pity that I didn't register in the moment. I thanked her and made my way down the corridor, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished floor, the sound echoing slightly in the hallway. As I approached the large corner office at the end of the hall, I could see through the glass walls that the blinds were partially closed, allowing only slivers of visibility into the space beyond. I found this strange, since my husband had always mentioned how his boss preferred an open-door policy and valued transparency above all else. It was one of the many things he admired about her leadership style. I was about 10 feet away from the door when I glimpsed them through a gap in the blinds. The cake nearly slipped from my suddenly numb fingers. My husband was down on one knee in front of his boss, holding what was unmistakably a small velvet box, the kind that typically holds engagement rings. I froze in place, the cake suddenly feeling like a lead weight in my hands. I couldn't hear what was being said through the closed door, but I didn't need to. The expression on his face, a mixture of nervous adoration and hopeful anticipation, was one I had seen before, on our own wedding day 5 years earlier when he had waited for me at the altar. His boss, a tall, elegant woman with perfectly styled blonde hair cut in a sharp bob, covered her mouth with her manicured hands, nodding enthusiastically. Her eyes were wide with surprise and delight. Then they embraced, and he lifted her off her feet, spinning her around the office the way he used to do with me when we were first dating. When he set her down, she extended her left hand, admiring whatever ring he had just placed on her finger. A ring that was undoubtedly more expensive and impressive than the modest diamond he had given me when we were both just starting our careers. In that singular moment, I felt my entire world collapse around me. The past 5 years of marriage, our countless conversations about starting a family next year, the house we had just put a down payment on in a good school district for the children we planned to have, it all came crashing down around me like a house of cards in a windstorm. I stood there paralyzed as hot tears blurred my vision and a lump formed in my throat so large I could barely breathe around it. Somehow, I managed to back away without being seen. My body moved on autopilot as I walked robotically to the nearest restroom, locked myself in a stall, and set the anniversary cake down on the closed toilet lid. Then I covered my mouth with both hands to muffle the violent sobs that racked my body. The pain was physical, like someone had reached into my chest and was squeezing my heart until it threatened to burst. I bit down on my knuckles to keep from screaming, tasting the salt of my tears as they streamed down my face. I'm not sure how long I stayed there, crumpled on the floor of that bathroom stall, my carefully applied makeup running in black streaks down my cheeks. It could have been minutes or hours. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the face of such betrayal. Eventually, though, I ran out of tears. A strange calm settled over me, like the eerie stillness after a devastating storm. I pulled myself up from the floor, legs shaking, and opened the stall door. Looking at my reflection in the mirror above the sinks, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Eyes red and swollen, face blotchy, hair disheveled from running my hands through it in distress. With mechanical precision, I splashed cold water on my face, wiped away the mascara streaks, reapplied my makeup from the emergency kit I kept in my purse, and fixed my hair as best I could. Looking at my reflection once more, I made a decision that would alter the course of my life. I wouldn't confront him. Not yet. Not here, in front of his colleagues, giving him the opportunity to manage the narrative or make me look like the hysterical, unreasonable wife. No, this required a different approach. I picked up the anniversary cake, straightened my shoulders, and walked out of the restroom with my head held high. The woman with the curly red hair was still at her desk as I passed. I approached her, my face a careful mask of composed dignity. "Could you please give this to my husband when he's out of his meeting?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady despite the turmoil raging inside me. "Tell him it's from me, for our anniversary, and that I'll see him at home tonight." She looked at me with unmistakable sympathy in her eyes, as if she knew exactly what was happening behind that office door. Perhaps everyone in the office knew except me. The thought made me feel even more humiliated, a naive fool who was the last to realize she was being played for one. "Of course," she said, taking the cake from my hands with unusual gentleness. "Are you okay? Do you want to sit down for a minute?" I nodded, forcing what I hoped looked like a genuine smile. "I'm fine, just running late for another appointment. Thank you for your help." I walked back to the elevator with measured steps, keeping my spine straight and my chin up until the doors closed behind me. Only then did I allow my shoulders to slump slightly. But even in the privacy of the elevator, I didn't cry. Something had shifted inside me, something fundamental and irreversible. In the taxi ride home, staring out at the city streets passing by in a blur, I didn't shed a single tear. Instead, I began to think, to consider, to plan. When I arrived home, I went straight to our shared home office and powered up the computer. My husband and I had always operated on a basis of complete transparency. Joint bank accounts, shared passwords, open access to each other's emails and calendars, or so I had believed. With hands that now moved with determined purpose rather than trembling with emotion, I started methodically digging through our financial records, emails, phone bills, and credit card statements for the past 2 years. What I found was both devastating and validating. The evidence was overwhelming and had been there all along, hidden in plain sight had I only thought to look. Expensive dinners charged to our joint credit card on nights he claimed to be working late or having drinks with clients, hotel reservations at boutique establishments across town or in nearby cities where he attended conferences, jewelry purchases from high-end stores that I had never received, theater tickets, weekend getaways, even a spa day, all paid for from our joint account, all enjoyed with someone else. Their affair had been going on for at least a year and a half. Almost a third of our entire marriage had been a lie. I discovered that the something special he had planned for our anniversary dinner was actually an elaborate ruse. According to his calendar, which was synced to our shared family account, he was planning to tell me over our anniversary dinner that he needed to go on an emergency business trip the next day to handle a crisis with a major client. The trip was real enough. He had booked flights and made reservations, but it wasn't for business. He had organized a romantic weekend getaway with her at a luxury resort 3 hours away from our city, the kind of place with private villas, infinity pools, and spectacular ocean views. The kind of place we had always talked about going someday, when we could afford it. I sat back in my chair, numb with shock and betrayal, as the full picture of his deception came into focus. Then something shifted inside me, like tectonic plates realigning after an earthquake. The paralyzing sadness began to crystallize into anger, and the anger rapidly transformed into cold, clear determination. I wasn't going to scream or cry or beg him to choose me over her. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I wasn't going to play the role of the hysterical, abandoned wife. Instead, I began my own planning, silent, methodical, precise. First, I took half the money from our joint savings account and transferred it to a new account in my name only at a different bank. Not all of it. I wasn't trying to be vindictive or criminal, just practical and protective of my own interests. Then I called a lawyer friend who specialized in divorce cases and scheduled a consultation for the following day. I was done being naive. I packed a small emergency bag with essentials, clothes, toiletries, important medications, and a few sentimental items I couldn't bear to lose if things went sideways, and hid it in the trunk of my car. I gathered all our important documents: marriage certificate, property deeds, insurance policies, tax returns, and made copies of everything. I took screenshots and photos of all the evidence I had found of his affair and stored them securely in a password-protected cloud account he couldn't access. By the time I heard his key in the lock around 7 in the evening, I had composed myself completely. I was sitting at our dining table, which I had set beautifully with candles, flowers, and our best china, the wedding gifts we had received from his parents. I had ordered his favorite takeout food from the upscale Italian restaurant where we had our first date, and I was wearing the expensive lingerie he had given me for Christmas, but that I had never worn, claiming it was too fancy for everyday life. "Happy anniversary," I said, greeting him with a kiss as if nothing was wrong, as if my world hadn't imploded just hours earlier. He looked momentarily stunned to see the romantic setup, then guilty, then visibly relieved that I seemed completely oblivious to his betrayal. He handed me a small gift box wrapped in silver paper. Inside was a pair of diamond stud earrings, nowhere near as impressive as the necklace he had bought his boss fiancé 3 weeks ago according to our credit card statement, but I exclaimed over them as if they were the most thoughtful, meaningful gift I'd ever received. Throughout dinner, he was distracted and jumpy, checking his phone frequently under the table, probably texting her updates about when he'd be free. I pretended not to notice, maintaining a light, cheerful conversation about neighborhood gossip and plans for the summer. I asked about his day at work, and he told me about meetings and client presentations and budget reviews, carefully avoiding any mention of proposing marriage to another woman in his corner office. I nodded and smiled, asking all the right questions, playing the role of devoted, unsuspecting wife perfectly, while something cold and resolved crystallized in my chest. After dinner, I suggested we open a bottle of champagne and watch our wedding video, for old time's sake, to celebrate our 5th anniversary. He reluctantly agreed, clearly uncomfortable, but unable to find a reasonable excuse to refuse such a sentimental request on our anniversary night. As we sat on the couch, my head on his shoulder just like in happier times, I studied his face, reflected in the darkened TV screen as our younger selves exchanged vows promising lifelong fidelity and devotion. There was no remorse there, no inner conflict or guilt, just poorly concealed impatience. He was waiting for the right moment to tell me about his business trip the next day. When he finally did bring it up, I acted appropriately disappointed, but understanding. I told him I'd miss him, but that we could celebrate properly when he returned. I even offered to drive him to the airport the next day to maximize our time together. He looked so relieved that for a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. That night, I slept beside him for the last time, listening to the familiar rhythm of his breathing, wondering how many nights he had lain awake in this same bed thinking of her, planning his escape from our marriage, crafting the elaborate web of lies that I had been too trusting to see. In the morning, I made him breakfast and kissed him goodbye as he left for what was supposedly a normal workday, promising to be back in time for me to drive him to the airport in the afternoon for his business trip. As soon as he was gone, I sprang into action with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done and had limited time to do it. I called my lawyer and finalized our strategy, authorizing her to prepare divorce papers immediately. I contacted a real estate agent about quietly listing our house for sale, the home we had purchased together just a year ago, with dreams of filling it with children and memories. I reached out to family members and a small circle of trusted friends, selectively sharing what had happened and asking for their emotional support in the coming weeks. Then I went to the bank in person to ensure my new separate account was secure and completely inaccessible to him, even with his status as my spouse. When it was time to drive him to the airport for his flight to the coastal resort where he was meeting his boss-turned-fiancé, I was the picture of the supportive wife. I helped him with his luggage, reminded him to pack his sunscreen, he burned easily, kissed him goodbye at the departure area, and waved until he was out of sight, disappearing past the security checkpoint. Then I drove straight to my lawyer's office to sign the divorce papers she had prepared before heading to the same luxury resort where my husband was meeting his lover. I had booked my own room there the previous night, using my new separate account and a different credit card he didn't know about. The resort was large enough that I could avoid them easily if I wanted to, but I wasn't there to confront them or create a scene. I was there to document everything, to gather irrefutable evidence for the divorce proceedings. It wasn't about pain or masochism or torturing myself by watching them together. It was about being thorough, about not leaving anything to chance, about ensuring that he couldn't deny what he had done or paint me as paranoid or unreasonable. For 2 days, I shadowed them from a distance, wearing large sunglasses and a hat to avoid being recognized. I gathered photographic evidence of their affair, images of them kissing by the infinity pool, holding hands during a walk on the beach, sharing intimate dinners at the resort's exclusive restaurants. I even managed to capture a clear video of them embracing passionately in front of their villa, room number 312, paid for with our joint credit card, under his name but registered for 2 guests. On the final morning of their romantic getaway, while they were having breakfast at the beachfront cafe, I left an envelope at the front desk, asked for it to be delivered to their room. Inside was a copy of our wedding photo, the one that had stood on his desk at work until it mysteriously disappeared 6 months ago, and a simple note written in my neat handwriting. I know everything. Your things will be waiting for you. At your boss's place. Don't come home. Then I checked out of my own room and drove back to our house, soon to be my house alone according to the legal strategy my lawyer and I had devised based on his infidelity and financial deception. I had already arranged for a locksmith to change all the locks and for a moving company to pack up his belongings. His clothes, personal items, collectibles, electronics, and the few pieces of furniture that had been his before our marriage were all neatly packed, labeled, and ready to be delivered to his boss's address, which I had found easily in the company directory. When my husband returned from his business trip 2 days later, expecting to come home to his unsuspecting wife, he discovered that his key wouldn't work in any of the locks. He called me, first genuinely confused, then increasingly frantic, then angry, then pleading as the realization of what had happened began to dawn on him. I didn't answer any of his 17 calls or respond to his 34 text messages. Instead, I sent him a single text with the address where he could find his belongings, along with the name and contact information of my lawyer. His boss called me later that day. Her voice trembling with indignation and poorly suppressed rage, she demanded to know who I thought I was, making such a scene and disrupting their lives this way. She claimed that my husband and I had been practically separated for months. News to me, that they hadn't meant for things to happen this way, that they had planned to tell me properly after my husband returned from the trip. She accused me of spying on them, of vindictive behavior, of refusing to accept that my marriage was over and that my husband had found his true soulmate. I listened, calmly and silently, letting her vent her anger and self-justification without interruption. When she finally ran out of steam, I simply said, "You two deserve each other. I hope you enjoy explaining to HR how this relationship developed while you were his direct supervisor," and hung up. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly quick and straightforward, largely thanks to the extensive evidence I had gathered and my husband's desperate desire to keep the details of his affair from becoming public knowledge at work. Workplace relationships between superiors and subordinates were expressly forbidden by company policy, considering they created conflicts of interest and potential liability issues. His boss had far more to lose than he did: her executive position, her 6-figure salary, her professional reputation, possibly even her entire career could be jeopardized if the full circumstances of their relationship came to light. I was fair in the settlement negotiations, guided by a desire for clean closure, rather than prolonged conflict or revenge. I didn't want alimony or an unreasonable portion of our assets. I just wanted a clean break and the dignity of walking away from the marriage on my own terms rather than his. In the end, I kept the house, buying out his share with a new mortgage, my car, and exactly half of our savings and investments. He kept his car, his retirement accounts, his stock options from the company, and the other half of our savings. But the real victory, the true vindication, came 3 months later. Through mutual friends and former colleagues of my ex-husband, I learned that his fairy tale romance with his boss had crumbled dramatically under the strain of the scandal. Despite their best efforts to keep their relationship quiet and presented as something that developed only after I was out of the picture, word had spread throughout the company like wildfire. Anonymous tips, not from me, had reached the Human Resources Department and the company's board of directors. His boss had been asked to resign due to her undisclosed relationship with a subordinate and the potential legal liability it created for the company. My ex-husband had been passed over for a promotion he'd been counting on, with senior management citing concerns about judgment and professional boundaries. in his performance review. Their engagement was off, the affair was over, and they were both left to deal with the professional and personal consequences of the choices they had made. As for me, I sold the house that contained too many painful memories and moved to a different city, closer to my sister and her family, who had been my rocks throughout the ordeal. I used some of the money from the sale to go back to graduate school, pursuing a degree in a field I had always been passionate about, but had put on hold to support my husband's career ambitions. I made new friends, reconnected with old ones I had neglected during my marriage, joined a support group for people healing from betrayal trauma, and slowly, painstakingly rebuilt my life one day at a time. The healing wasn't linear or easy. There were days when the pain and anger felt as fresh as that moment in the office hallway. There were nights when I cried myself to sleep, wondering what I could have done differently. If I had somehow failed as a wife, if there had been signs I should have seen sooner. But gradually, those days grew fewer and farther between. I began to recognize that his betrayal was a reflection of his character flaws, not my worth as a partner or a person. It's been 2 years now since that fateful anniversary day when I stood in that hallway with a homemade cake in my hands, watching my marriage disintegrate before my eyes. 2 years of grief, growth, therapy, and gradually rediscovering who I am outside of that relationship. Sometimes people ask me if I regret how I handled things, if perhaps I should have confronted him immediately or tried to save the marriage through counseling. I always give the same answer: absolutely not. My revenge wasn't about causing him pain or creating a dramatic scene that would provide momentary satisfaction but ultimately leave me feeling empty. It wasn't about destroying his life or prospects. It was about taking back control of my life from someone who had betrayed my trust in the most fundamental way possible. It was about showing him, and more importantly, showing myself, that I wasn't a victim but a survivor, capable of making difficult decisions and rebuilding from the ashes of betrayal. Last month, in one of those strange coincidences life occasionally throws our way, I ran into my ex-husband at a professional conference in another state. He looked older than his 34 years. With new lines around his eyes and gray streaking his once dark hair, he seemed diminished somehow, less confident than the ambitious young executive I had married. He approached me cautiously at the coffee station during a break between sessions, asking if we could talk for a few minutes. Over coffee in the hotel lobby, he attempted what I suppose was meant to be an apology, though it came across more as self-justification and subtle blame-shifting. He had been confused, he said, under intense pressure at work, unsure about the direction of his life, overwhelmed by the expectations of marriage and potential parenthood. The affair had been a mistake, a momentary weakness that spiraled out of control. He never meant to hurt me. He had often thought about reaching out but wasn't sure if I would want to hear from him. Not once during this conversation did he actually admit that what he did was morally wrong. Not once did he take full responsibility for his choices without qualifying them with excuses. Every sentence began with "I" and ended with an explanation designed to elicit sympathy or understanding. It was as if, even after all this time, he still couldn't see beyond his own narrative to understand the devastation his actions had caused. I listened politely, sipping my coffee and nodding occasionally. When he finally finished, I simply said, "I hope you find what you're looking for," and walked away, leaving him sitting alone at the table. I felt no anger toward him anymore. No burning desire for justice or retribution. Those emotions had served their purpose in giving me the strength to leave, but holding on to them would only have poisoned my own healing. As I left the coffee shop and stepped out into the bright sunshine, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. In that moment, I realized that the best revenge wasn't about making him suffer or fail. It was about moving on completely and creating a life so full and meaningful that his betrayal became nothing more than a footnote in my story rather than its defining chapter. Today, I'm seeing someone new, a kind and thoughtful man I met through a hiking group in my new city. He's honest and direct in his communication, values transparency above all else, and understands the importance of building trust slowly and consistently through actions rather than just words. We're taking things one day at a time, building a solid foundation before making any major commitments. I've told him about my past, not as a warning or with bitterness, but simply as part of my story. And he understands why I need to proceed cautiously in relationships now. My ex-husband, I've heard through our dwindling number of mutual connections, is still single, still trying to rebuild his career after the fallout from the scandal, still telling anyone who will listen that he was somehow the victim of circumstances beyond his control, of bad timing, of poor judgment, rather than fundamentally flawed character, still unable or unwilling to truly own the consequences of his choices. But I know better. We all make choices in life, hundreds of them every day. His choice was to betray the vows we made to each other, to lie to my face for over a year, to build a future with someone else while pretending to build one with me. My choice was to refuse to let that betrayal define me or determine my worth. In the end, I didn't just survive his betrayal. I thrived in spite of it. I built a new life that fits me better than the old one ever did. I discovered strengths I never knew I possessed and redefined success on my own terms rather than as half of a couple. And that's a revenge sweeter than any I could have planned or imagined on that terrible day when I stood in that hallway watching my husband propose to another woman. And you, if you were in my place, what would you have done differently? Leave your comment.